All right. Well, welcome. How's everyone doing today? Good to see all of you here this morning as we've come to honor and worship the Lord. It's a wonderful, nice day out there, minus the wind, right? It's a little bit windy today, but we're in here. It's nice and able to get out of that wind. This morning, if you have your Bible, we're going to jump over to Mark chapter 7, continuing in our series on the book of Mark. Today, in this passage, he deals with what is clean and unclean. The Pharisees were a group of people that followed the traditions and very intently. Right? Wash your hands a certain way and do certain things and certain order of whatever to be sure we're clean. A lot of this was physical, right? On the stuff that you could see and be done on the outside of your body. And since they were always looking for ways to prove Jesus was not of God, they would look for ways to entrap him. One of the ways they would do this was to look for traditions or rituals Jesus or his disciples might be breaking. We've seen this before in the book of Mark. We saw the disciples asked, why is Jesus eating with sinners? You might remember Jesus went to dinner at a sinner's house, which in that text was, or in that case, a sinner was anyone who wasn't Jewish for the most part, who wasn't following the Jewish custom. So why would Jesus hang out and be with them? And then we also saw Jesus' question about his disciples not fasting. We saw the disciples accused of working on the Sabbath. Remember, they're walking to the synagogue to worship God, and along the way, they pick some wheat. Just, a couple, that's not working. Hey, that's whatever. But in the tradition, ritualistic part of this rule, they would call that working, and they could not do that. And so they would attack Jesus, trying to accuse him of being not from God, and to try to get the crowds to turn against him and punish him in whatever way they could. So we're going to pick up chapter 7, verses 1 through 5 here to start with. And here's where we see the complaint. Right? The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of the disciples eating food with hands that were unclean, that is, unwashed. And the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. So not so much just wash your hands, but it was a ceremonial washing that needed to be done. Verse 4, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash, and they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the traditions of the elders instead of eating their food with their unclean hands? So there's your complaint. They are not ceremonial washing their hands. Their hands are unclean. Why are they doing that, Jesus? And so here comes the reversal. The Pharisees accuse disciples, but Jesus shows them their sin. Mark verse 7. Jesus replied, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men. And he said to them, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses his father or mother must be put to death. But you say that if a man says to his father or mother, whatever help you might otherwise have received from me is korban. That is, a gift devoted to God. Then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your traditions that you have handed down, and you do many things like that. And so the first thing I want to notice here is I think it's great. Jesus does not bother answering their question. Doesn't give them a reason, an excuse, or anything. And sometimes that's just what we need to do. People will ask us questions and stuff that it's just better not to, we're not going there. But he takes and then he asks them a question. And he starts to go, well, why do you do this? The Bible tells you, or your scriptures tell you, honor your mother and father, which means as your mother and father get older, you should take care of them in their old age. You should tend to them and do what you can and whatever. But he says, you have found a loophole. Like, you don't need to, if you can say, oh, this money's designated to do things for God, then I don't really have the money. I don't have to help you anymore. You're not honoring your parents and taking care of them. You've found this loophole. I'm doing something for God, and God's more important. Yes, God is more important than your family. But God, who is more important, said, honor your parents, take care of your family, provide for your family's needs, right? And so listening to the more important person is more important than, I don't know, I'm confusing myself now. We listen and obey God, which meant take care of your parents. And so you're not doing that. So he's turned this thing around on them. Points out, hey, wait, you want to accuse them of doing something wrong? Look what you're doing. And he tells them at the end there, and there's many things like that. There's lots of little things like that you do. And then we see the truth about clean and unclean. First, Jesus addresses the crowds that are around. Beginning in verse 14. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it is what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. Jesus is telling them, you are not what you eat. Which I'm glad, because I'd be either an enchilada or a chili dog, because that's what I probably eat the most of. Right? He said, you're not what you eat. It's deeper than that. But what comes out of it? What is your attitude? How do you act? What is the stuff that comes out is what makes you unrighteous, unclean, unlike God. Right? Not what is going into you. The food and the stuff and a little bit of dirt getting into you isn't going to really make you unclean before God. And then he addresses the disciples. In verse 17, after he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. Are you so dull, he asked. Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from the outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and then out of his body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. He went on, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All of these evils come from inside and make a man unclean. See, Jesus wasn't concerned with the food and the stuff and that processing. He was concerned with our heart, our spirit, who we are, what will come out of us when push comes to shove. How will we respond? Will we respond Christ-like or God-like? Or will we respond holy? For those that are following the weekly Bible reading, today's verse was telling us to be holy because God's holy. Something like that was today's verse. That's what He wants us inside to be holy. And what we eat doesn't necessarily make us holy. Washing our hands in a certain ceremonial way before doesn't make us holy. Going to church every Sunday and never missing and being right on time and what it doesn't make us holy. right? Just going through routines doesn't make us holy. It's letting the Spirit of God come over us and transform and change our heart and what is in us. And that's what Jesus was concerned about. And that's what we need to be concerned about. Because what's going on in us impacts what comes out of us. You can be unclean on the inside and still look good on the outside. Think about the Pharisees who started this whole conversation. On the outside, they looked good. They went to their synagogues. They would go to the temple for the proper ceremonies and different things like that. They said the right things. They did the right things. They washed their hands correctly. They prayed. They did things publicly that would make them look good, which Jesus also came against. Hey, when you fast, don't be like the hypocrites of the Pharisees who fast and do it for everyone to know. And they pray on the corner to be seen. So they did lots of stuff that people would go, oh, look how spiritual they are. Look how religious they are. Look how close to God they are. But as Jesus pointed out, you're twisting things. You're looking good, but on the inside, you're really not doing good. And so push comes to shove, what comes out? Well, we saw what happens with them. When push comes to shove, when someone comes and threatens their rituals and their ways of doing things, what comes out? Murder, deceit, lying. They push it. And so what was really happening in these Pharisees' hearts was ugly, was unclean. It was eating at their souls because they had sinfulness within them. And it was eating their souls. I want you guys to take a look at this picture today. It's probably hard to see out there, but I don't know if you can tell. This is on Michelle's grandparents' property as you enter their property. This is a nice big oak tree. At least it looks nice and big here. And it is big, or it was big. Let me kind of get a little closer look. This is the other side of that oak tree, and if you notice this, it's only going the one direction. It used to go two directions. Get in a little bit closer. And you can see here there's a big chunk just missing, and it's just like it's hollow inside of there. And there you can probably see that one pretty good. You can just see it's hollow. But when you go back to that first picture, you can see from the one side, it looks like a good, big, beautiful, strong oak tree. But it wasn't. Now, before the winds and the weight of the tree snapped this whole side off, it looked that way all the way around. But what was going on, there was this beetle bug or some sort of bug, worm, some sort, that got inside and was eating it from the inside out. So here are some limbs and part of the part that fell. And we were there helping remove this tree and chop it up and get it ready to be burnt. And I took some pieces for myself. So this was from a limb of that tree. And that's what was happening on the inside of this tree. Probably should get in front of the camera, huh? The bugs that got into the center of this tree and was eating at the center of the tree. And it was looking great on the outside. Green leaves, blooming, looked beautiful. And it just kept eating away, eating away, eating away. And all the time, the tree looked like a good, healthy tree. It was dying from the inside out. And eventually, the weight of the limbs, the weight of the side of the tree, maybe it was in the winter, the snow, weight of snow and wind, it finally crashed to the ground on that side. And then ultimately, we went and we chopped up the part that fell, and then someone came on behind us and took down the rest of the tree and finished it off. I think that's what sin does in our souls. I think that's what was the uncleanness of the Pharisees that Jesus was addressing. Not the stuff that you eat, but the sinfulness you take in, the pride that they had. They were proud, arrogant. They thought they were all of that. They were slanderers, liars against Jesus. All this stuff from the inside, it was eating their spirit, their soul away. And eventually it pushes them to murder, to have Jesus arrested and murdered. So when push comes to shove, when the storm comes, and we see inside our soul, sometimes people you go to church with aren't as solid as they look. Because they're allowing uncleanness in their heart, in their soul, in their mind. And that's what Jesus is addressing this morning. He wants us to take care of our soul, our spirit, and to be clean in that regard. Otherwise, there's just stuff eating at us and eating at us and eating at us, and we're dying. Jesus goes on to list all kinds of sin that he says comes from an unclean individual. Some are large and easy to identify, such as murder, theft, slander. Others are harder to identify, but still come from being unclean, such as evil thoughts, deceit, greed. And with this information, we must ask ourselves a couple questions. If food doesn't make our inner being unclean, what does? If I want to be clean, how do I accomplish that? This text doesn't answer that question. So we must look elsewhere in the Bible to learn, how do I be clean on the inside? In the way that Jesus wants us to be clean. And so just going through ritual things of coming to church and doing those things and then going out and whatever aren't necessarily the things that are building up our soul and our spirit and preparing us for the storm and preparing us for meeting God someday. So that's that question. If I want to clean, how do I accomplish that? Let's turn to Philippians 4, verses 8 through 9. Here we learn two things from Paul that we can do to accomplish being clean. Verse 8, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. First, think good thoughts. That's what Paul tells us. Paul gives us a list of things that our minds should be on. If we fill our mind with these things, they will take over. Right? Don't think about, or I want you to do not think about a pink elephant with a purple bikini and yellow polka dots. Right? Just almost because I said it, you kind of thought, even if it was just in thinking through the process. But if we hear it and we see it, we'll think about it. And so what we focus on can impact our whole thought process. What we're letting in through our ears and our eyes and our thought process, what we read, all of that stuff can impact us. And if you don't believe me, why did, I don't know how many companies pay $1.5 or more million for 30-second ads during the Super Bowl? Because they know if we can get people to think about our product, they're more likely to want to purchase our product. See, advertisers understand the power of thought. If we can get them to think this way, to think about this, they will buy what we're doing. If we can get, and so they find ways to make us think about it in hopes to alter our buying, what we're going to buy. So, we want to be clean on the inside, we need to work on what we're letting in to our mind. What are we letting dominating our thought process? If everything we take in is slanted towards the opposite of Paul's list, we're very likely to develop that in our inner being. If we are completely focused on the things of the world, we're more likely to become and act that way, to adopt it, to believe it, it becomes truth. I mean, you've heard that saying, right? If you tell a lie enough times, it becomes truth, at least in the mind of the person that's telling the lie. So I believe we need to be more selective in what we take in, or how much of it we take in. What movies are we watching? How many, how long, how much? What books are you reading? What conversations are you having? Are these things full of violence and anger? Are they full of sexual immorality? Are they full of deceit? If so, what are you balancing it with? What are you doing to stay clean or become clean? Do you realize that each action we commit begins with a thought? Everything we do, we think. Now, some of it, we've become our subconscious, we just kind of do it. For instance, my wedding ring is a little bit too big for my hand, for my finger. And one day this week, I was dry, and I play with it regularly, don't even realize it. And I was taking Adeline to school, and we'd been driving like 2 or 3 minutes, and I went to, my ring's gone. I didn't know, I didn't think that I was going to go play with my ring. I just, my ring's gone. And when I was getting in the car, I'd put the key ring on my fingers, and when I pulled them off, I flung it off in the car and didn't realize it. And for a couple, but because my mind thinks, play with that ring, spin that ring, do whatever I do with it without thinking. But I'm still having a thought process of, do that, move it. Same thing, you guys that drove here today. How many of you thought, okay, take my foot off the gas, put it on the brake now? Probably no one, but maybe Adeline. Because Adeline has got her driver permit, and so she is still in the stage where, all right, move my foot from here to here. I got to, but we just do it, right? We come up to a red light, we're stopped. We're coming to make a right turn. We just turn on the turn signal. We don't think about it. But it was a thought. It was something in our mind told our hand, our foot to do what it needs to do. It just kind of happened. So everything we do. So if just all the good things we do are the things that are neutral, like playing with a wedding band on your finger, start with a thought. So do our bad decisions. So are the things that we're going to say or do or whatever. We think about it in some regard. And unfortunately, we get to a place that we become so dead inside that we just sometimes will make bad decisions without realizing we're making bad decisions. It's like getting into a cold swimming pool, right? We just kind of, at least for me, I ease in. And it's better to just run and dive in, I think, sometimes. But I kind of ease. Well, that's what, until I get used to it. And then I get a little further in. And I get a little more used to it until finally, all right, now I get in all the way. We kind of do that with our decisions. We kind of ease in, do a little bit, and get used to it until we're used to it. Then we go a little further. Until that gets comfortable. Then we go a little further. But it's all a thought process. And we need to recognize those things in our life. Recognize them and then stop them. Second, Paul tells us at the end of this passage, verse 9, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. Apply it. Do it. We still get to watch Paul's life. We just finished the book of Acts on Wednesday nights as we've been reading through the Bible together, or the New Testament together. And we get to see Paul's life and how he lived. And the big point on Wednesday night was Paul's number one goal was for people to become like him, to become Christ followers. And we saw how he did that. And no matter who he was with, no matter what, the people who were imprisoning him, he would tell them that Jesus loves them. Right? It was just everything that he did. And he'd say, hey, watch me and act like me. As he follows the example of Christ, we follow his example, we follow the example of Christ. We look at that and we apply the things to our life. But in order to know what to do and to apply those things to our lives, we have to be thinking and watching in those things. Right? We need to make sure we're taking time to not just read words on a page, but that we're paying attention to what we read. We've all had conversations with people. We've done it to people. They've done it to us. Where we're talking to them and they're there, but they have no idea what we're saying. Or you're not really paying attention to know what they're saying. That's frustrating, isn't it? When someone does that to you. Or embarrassing when you have to say, oh, I was thinking about something else. Would you repeat that? But too often we read the Bible that way. I'm listening to the Word of God, but we need to learn to really engage and read it and see what it's saying and then apply it to our life. And what does this mean for me? And it's tough. I'm reading through the Old Testament right now and just through all the ritual rules and laws and sacrifices and things. That's just where I'm at right now. And that's much harder to engage and apply because we're under a different system now. But there are still some good lessons and understanding, and it's foundational for even who Christ is and what he's going to be, and it's important. And so we read and we study and we process it, and then we apply it to our lives. We ask questions of the text. Well, do I do what God's asking in this text? Do I apply this? Is it applicable to me today? And how do I do that? So we watch. And we watch people like Paul. In 1 Corinthians 4:16, Paul says, therefore I urge you to imitate me. In 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Philippians 3:17, join with others in following my example, brothers, and take note of those who live according to the pattern we gave you. Paul was not some egomaniac. Just don't want everyone to be like him. First, he realized he was someone in their life that was applying the things of God, and they could use him as an example. Second, they did not have the Bible in the way that we do, in the recorded form that we have to read and see what Jesus said ourselves and to see what Jesus was like. But he was teaching and talking and modeling it. I think it's important that we read the book of Mark and imitate what we see Christ doing. We watch him, we observe him, we pay attention to him over and over and over. We want to be like him. We want to be like him. Years ago, I was working at a kids' camp. And the camp director had a son who was, 5, 6, 7 years old. And then he had a little brother, a couple years younger than him. And for some reason, they asked me, hey, just watch these two guys here. I have to go do something. So I'm watching them on the playground area. And they had these big tractor tires that were probably this tall. And however big around, laying on their side this tall. So they were that wide. And there was several of them. And the big brother has no problem of running and jumping off and onto the ground and jumping into the next one and this and that. And there's like whatever, right? But his little brother wasn't as tall as the tractor tire, but he had somehow climbed up there. And he went running and was going to dive and jump off the same way as big brother. But he couldn't make it. And I reached out and grabbed him just as he jumped. But what he was doing, he wanted to be like his big brother. He wanted to imitate. He wanted to do what his big brother's doing. And that's how we should be with Christ. He's our big brother. What is he doing? What is he up to? How do I follow him? Well, the first way is we read his word and we study him and we apply that to our lives. We find and listen to his teachings and the things that he says you need to change. Like in today's text, hey, there's some things going on. You're doing some things right. You're going to church every week, but even though you're going to church every week, you're not honoring your parents. Right? And many things like that. Though you're looking like you're walking the walk, but you hold a grudge against your neighbor. You don't hold a grudge against your neighbor. And it's a process. Right? We understand that we don't necessarily change our, but it's a growth process, and God's grace covers us. But God's grace doesn't give us an excuse to not change. We grow in his grace. His grace protects us, but his grace then also says, keep getting better. And so how do we think? What's influencing our thoughts? What are we doing? What are we up to? So, we've studied the scriptures. We listen to sermons. We get engaged in Wednesday night Bible study. We listen to pastors that we want to make sure they are pastors that are following Christ's example to the best of their ability. And we listen to their teachings online or read books by other Christian people that are out there that are writing. And we look for stuff. Now, are they going to be perfect? No. Are they going to make mistakes? Absolutely, because they're human. But what is going on, and how can I learn from people who've been doing it longer? Look around the room. Who is someone that I can say, hey, take to lunch. Would you pour into me? Can I just hang out with you? Can we do stuff together? Because I want to learn from you on what this life is about. We build those relationships. And the best comes when you build a close relationship where you can interact with the individual and give them permission to speak into your lives. One of our core values here at the church is accountability. And that's really what that means.